We're in the beautiful Ballarat Art Gallery, which is the oldest and largest regional gallery in Australia, with a major retrospective of work by Robert Imhoff, with an extraordinarily eclectic group of works. Rob has been a commercial photographer at the top of his game for a very long time. Are you into the digital cameras?
I'm into any form of capture. There's a shot of the Queen in the next room, and there's another one close by of a man with a bowler hat walking across Westminster Bridge. I've got a London Cabinet, the Houses of Parliament in the background, the man with the bowler hat, and I'm running beside him with my Hi8 digital camera, because that's all I had with me, capturing single frames. Taking a good photograph is getting all the right elements together. Some days, on some occasions, the most appropriate device has been a cardboard box with a pinhole in it to give me the look that I wanted. So I've never been concerned about the crossover to digital. At the moment, photography is missing the art of the magician. Photographers were magicians because clients and agency and talent and people would all be there when you, the photographer, press the shutter, click. And several days later, they'd see the result, quite often looking nothing like what they remember. So you've been able to manipulate behind the scenes, whether it be your processing technique, your printing process, or whatever. I think, the return to the good old days where you have to take it off, process it, and have some time, you're buying time to create and articulate the visual interpretation that you want. I think you'll see it coming back more and more.
It's a bit like the return of the vinyl record, I think, maybe.
There's a clarity in it.
Looking at the work, Rob, do you think that portraiture's where your real love is, or?
People are what the world's all about. Interaction with people, right from early days. It was always engagement with people. I was a shy child.
I'd never have known.
You'd have never known.
Never have guessed, no.
And I was a little quiet. I guess it was an only child syndrome.
Yeah, me too. You just have to go and make friends, don't you?
Yeah, you go and make friends. So I picked on Prince Philip with my brownie box in 1956. Security weren't that pleased as I crawled through the legs and stood up with my brownie box to go capture. The beauty of meeting people from all walks of life has been a pleasure as a photographer.
Well, you've done Prime Ministers. You've got John Howard, an early photograph of John Howard. Do you find it's very different dealing with someone like a John Howard?
John was with his entourage led by Graham Morris, his chief of staff. And I laughed at John and I said, well, I actually know a lot about you from television and media, so come with me. I led him into the studio. I'd preset the lighting, had a mark on the floor and said, okay, Rob Imhoff, as the photographer, directs you what to do. So if you walk around there and stand on that mark, I go behind the camera and I say to you, John Howard, today is your moment, John. John Howard impersonation of Max Gillies, please. And on that, John took his glasses off and did a blind Freddy to the camera. And I laughed and I said, not a good career move, sir, but it will never be seen. And he was a little surprised that I'd actually had film loaded and the camera ready to go. But it became the icebreaker. An amazing day of chatting about an array of subjects as we did a series of photographs. And that's the importance of just one-to-one. Love the engagement, whether it be a child, my first portrait, Sydney Bromley, Brian Brandt, asked the agency what budget, and basically they had no budget. So he said, the kid can do it, the assistant. It's one of my breakthrough moments.
You mentioned Brian Brandt then, and Brian Brandt was really obviously very important in your career. For a young photographer, how important is it getting that first break in the studio?
Critical. I nervously went to Brandt pre-Christmas 1968, the end of second year, with a year to go at RMIT. I'd seen an exhibition, not unlike this, in the Kodak Gallery in Collins Street. I picked Brandt's work out as being probably the best in the show. So I decided to go to him and I went and I said, Mr. Brandt, something bothers me about photography, bothers me in life. We all enter the world the same, we all exit the world the same. In between, some of us are gifted and some of us learn. Would you mind showing me how and what you do? So I went in for the Christmas holidays. By the end of January, Brian had made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I didn't go back and finish my course. I decided to stay at the coalface. That's what it's all about, getting the break. creating the break, getting the break.
I always say to kids wanting their first break that the most difficult thing you ever do is get in the door.
It's timing. It's getting in the door at the right time when there is a vacancy, or creating a vacancy. In my case, as I said, I created a vacancy by saying I'll work for nothing, I'll come in, and by the end of January I was setting up shots for him, and so forth. He was loving it, and we had a good rapport, which is important. It was definitely the big break, and from there the dominoes and the networking of the industry starts.
When you started with Brandt, did you have enough knowledge to do what you needed to do at Brandt's, or was it really learning on the job?
No, I had my days at Eltham High School, knowing little about art and being educated by Kevin English, head of art, who wrote the curriculum for the state. We debated Renaissance art, Bauhaus, Cubism as 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, etc. So our understanding of the art and design and the elements, we had to write a weekly essay on design elements of a Renaissance masterpiece. So you'd go home and you'd have to study the triangle, the snake, the circle, so on and so forth, and write a 1,500-word essay on what you thought about it. So I had that knowledge, and then I arrived at Brandt with a pretty good photographic grounding from RMIT. Photochemistry, sensitometry, all these subjects that you don't seem to hear much about today were fantastic grounding and understanding on the layers in a colour film, colour papers, etc., which allowed me to go on and do a lot of experimental work in my early photographic days.
The one thing that comes through with all the photographs, of course, is there's great technical expertise.
I realised what all my education was really about when I was putting it into practice, leading the eye from one part of a still life to another part of a still life, directing the power of the eye to follow the subject to a given point and not leave the page. And the same applies to a lot of the portraits. I use the same principles. I've heard many educators of photography talk about since, go to the galleries, go and study the master painters, the design, the stance, the body, the hands, the eyes, and so forth, the structures. And you see it as you look around the gallery. The secret is to learn it all and then do it as second nature without being conscious of it.
Well, with the portraits, you do look to have a fairly simple setup at work there. Maybe it's more complicated than it looks, but a lot of side light, maybe a bit of a key light or a kick light behind, but it does look quite simple what you've done.
Well, there's a couple of principles. The first one is when I came into photography, we were still in an era of what I call Hollywood lighting. A 10K here, a 5K there, a light here and a light there. If the good Lord wanted us to use more than one light, he would have put 2 suns in the sky or 3 suns in the sky. And daily, subconscious, subliminally, we are exposed to this marvellous light. We see it, we comment, what wonderful light. Single light source, refraction, reflection, so on and so forth. So it's a matter of mastering that in the studio. So predominantly all my work is based on window light from the masters in Renaissance painting.
Nothing beats a window, does it?
Nothing beats it. In my case, the window became a strobe light with layers of scrim to soften the light down, to give me that northern window light that you see in the paintings. Controlled light. So it's control of light and it's control of subject. And I do pair back the subjects. Clutter I don't like. Mike Reed, my film editor for decades, used to call me Mr. Minimalist. Even on film production, just pare it back.
Keep it simple.
So I've tried to do that with a lot of the portraits, a lot of the images.
Well, I mean, Irving Penn and a lot of the Americans from, say, the early 50s were doing a lot of that sort of modern light stuff too.
Three great masters: Irving Penn with the canvas backgrounds, master of the canvas backgrounds; Richard Avedon, the master of the white background; and Arnold Newman, who I had the pleasure of spending quite a bit of time with through the 80s, the environmental portrait specialist. I believe that all photography post 1960 are forms of those 3 great masters of American photography. And then, of course, across in London, the likes of Bailey, Duffy and Donovan kept it simple again, very simple. And those 3 I had great connection with. I think Duffy probably inspired my work as much as anyone, and between him and Bailey, great work there.
So who was your influence in terms of the photography itself though? Was Bailey and Duffy, were they more important to you than, say, the Americans?
I found myself working for Singapore Airlines, and I was going to say competing, but we actually worked on some projects together where Bailey and Duffy would be there. Part of the art, I think, of anything in life is to absorb what everyone else is doing. It's important to know who's doing what globally. I worked that out in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I tuned in very much to what was going on in London, what was going on in New York, and was inspired by it. If you absorb that work, you obviously lift your own standard. And you might recall in the 80s when I had the Lighthouse Gallery. The Lighthouse Gallery was part of the studio complex that was set up for me to bring work from America and England to hang on the walls to inspire not only photographers in the studio, but all the clients as to what a global standard of photography was. Not the local standard, but a global standard. And of course, the first show was an Arnold Newman. I was entrusted with 29 pieces from Newman's private collection from the Light Gallery in New York, and we brought them out. And it caused quite a stir, and it was wonderful work. And if you mix with all this work and look at it daily and dissect it and see technically why it's so good, visually why it's so good, it rubs off. It rubs off on you, it rubs off on the clients.
I remember the Lighthouse well, because you gave me my first show. I'm just amazed it's taken you another 30 years to put on your own.
Isn't it funny? People used to say to me, okay, you've got the Lighthouse Gallery. When are you having a show? Well, I couldn't have a show in my own gallery. Back in the 80s, Jenny Boddington was always chasing me to send her a collection that she could view and acquire for the National Gallery. But I've just never let anyone. There are no other images. No one has Imhoff prints hanging in their storerooms or boxes in their galleries, etc. I've avoided it. I've had this perverse view that there should be just one of each. And so for the first time ever, we've printed one of each, and here they are, never to be seen anywhere else. Hopefully it'll stay intact as a one-off collection. Athol Smith was one of my early mentors, and the one thing that Athol taught me was you don't need a motor drive. Don't press the button and hope you've got it. You should be able to direct the performance and click the shutter at the appropriate time. So a lot of the shots that Helen had spoken about, paring them back, I've nurtured the performance from the sitters to capture the moment. So I was able to do it on 8x10. And that's helped enormously when you go and scan them and blow them up to this size. They're always designed to be about the sizes that you see here. So selecting the sizes for the show was very straightforward for me. Solveig Larsen in the next room, I actually did a print that size in the 70s for Bond Colour for Ilford. Ilford ran it as promotion for Chrome prints in the 70s. It was that size. So because they've come off 8x10, I've always...
So that was an 8x10?
It was an 8x10. 8x10.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, 8x10 is 8 inches by 10 inches, and it's a very large piece of film.
It's the largest format that we shot that was available to us. There are a couple of reasons for selecting it. The first and foremost were reproduction qualities in the 70s were atrocious in the Australian publications. So my clients soon worked out that if they had an 8x10 Imhoff transparency to reproduce from, they would get a greater quality image in the magazines than a photographer that submitted a 35mm Kodachrome, which a lot did in those days, or 2.25. So I was happy to work with the discipline, and it also allowed me to play more of the magician of the unknown and just muck around with the 8x10 and do things and trim. And
how many shots would you get off if you were doing 810s?
Usually just a box, 10 sheets.
Right, so
the Solveig Larsen is my test shot. Because processing was a very tricky thing through the 70s and 80s, you learnt never to process first thing in the morning. The chemistry would sit overnight, the labs would start up, and I would have a day-long shoot to do one shot. Solveig, for instance, in that shot would arrive. We had morning tea, we'd chat as I'm trimming lighting. I'd set up my lighting the day before with my mannequin. and then I'd do final trims and get the talent, in that case Solveig, to put the tweed jacket on, and I'd fire off some test trainings, 2 or 3 test trainings, different colour filtration, exposure, send them to the lab in preparation for the afternoon shoot. That one came back, and I just love the connection between Solveig, her eyes, her body language, and the hands in that shot. It's been one of my favourite images over the years.
When you had a practice as a commercial photographer, though, you basically had to do everything. So portraiture was there, but you know, the work that you also did that I think was really well loved was the car photography, where you've got a much bigger thing to photograph to start with, big subject, highly reflective, difficult stuff. What was the transition from portraits to automotive like?
I wore many hats. A lot of people thought Imhoff, automotive photographer, Imhoff, food photographer, Imhoff, fashion photographer, etc., etc. I was purely Imhoff photographer. A subject is a subject. So the only difference in all the subjects was probably fashion, because of the glamour and because of the competitive nature of the fashion market globally. There was a certain air of, I thought, superficial flavour to it all that I didn't really like. So I didn't chase fashion work, and yet I got some of the best fashion gigs in the country. I had great rapport with people like Prue Acton, and did a lot of stuff for Prue. I did a lot of stuff for Cyclax. I remember early 1974, there's a photograph over here, 1974, where I won the gig over and above a number of fashion photographers, because my bid included, it was on location and included a wardrobe caravan, catering caravan. You know, the Imhoff circus would come to town, and Brian Brandt used to really take the mickey out of me and say it was overkill. Cecil B. DeMille, I was known as in the coffee room at Brandt's, because I take the smallest shoot and make it into a mega production. But every photographic brief that I received needed 100% in my opinion. Didn't matter how little the budget, how big the budget, they just needed to be done at a certain level. This girl's come out from London to do the shoot. She's been headhunted for the shoot. She's going to be used to the European way of life, which in those days the professionalism was at an ultimate level, but it wasn't.
Another step up.
Another step up. So I stepped up.
Being a master of all matters of photography, you then move yourself into cinematography. Well, you weren't a cinematographer, but you're a director.
Sure, yeah. There are so many things that a director has to have a finger in the pie on, right through from pre-production to post-production.
This man has never been to Great Keppel.
Created by people with an obsession to build a luxury car like no other.
It's a harsh world, and we can only do so much to protect ourselves.
Way to go. The Air Force?
I elected to find people that I trusted, and Barry Melseed for many years was my director of photography, where we would dialogue in pre-production about a certain look to get a visualizer that's on the same page. Prior to that, my entry into film came by demand from agencies that wanted their television to look like my stills. And so I started by being a freelance director of lighting. And this caused a lot of angst in the industry with film production companies. What do you mean Imhoff has to come on the set and do the lighting? Or directors of photography? Or directors, a couple of directors come to mind that were not too happy about being told that it has to have an Imhoff look. And this all came to a head in 1978 with Ruth Cracknell, where I was commissioned to do a campaign for Mayfair Hams. The art director had come out from London. He suggested that I should be responsible for the whole campaign, the stills and the television, that I had the eye to put the sets together. The brief was Norman Rockwell-inspired setting with Ruth Cracknell in it. And I'd always admired the work of Rockwell. Again, it's engagement, it's studies of people in their everyday environment. And the long and the short of it was that the agency at the last minute got the wobbles and decided that I hadn't directed 100% talent. I had the gig. I'd got my first check. I was away doing the shoot, and the art director walked in one day. He said, "You've been pulled from the job." I said, "Excuse me, we're weeks into the job. We're, right down the road and putting the set together and so forth." He said, "No, you're still doing the stills, but an American director has been hired because of his ability to direct 100% talent. So they'll film for a week, and then you'll come on board and have a week with Ruth Cracknell to do the stills." So on day one, I flew into Mudgee, New South Wales in a light plane and rolled up on day one of the film set, unannounced to anyone. And I remember walking into this huge set, and Ruth was behind the counter with the other talent, no rehearsing something, and first AD was instructing, etc. The American director was on the crane, the client agency were there. With crew and that, the numbers were enormous. And the American saw me, looked around and went, "Oh, Imhoff, what do you think? How Rockwellian is this?" And you could have heard a pin drop. The whole set went to silence straight away, including Ruth. And they're all staring at me, what's he going to say? And I looked at it. And I looked at this American and I said, "This is rubbish. You haven't interpreted a Rockwell at all. This image, I can smell it by looking at it. Dark and dingy is not Rockwell. Rockwell's about light and lively and so forth." So he got down and we had an altercation. And the long and the short of it was that the art director was asked what he thought, and he actually agreed with me. So he and I were dispatched in my light plane to go and put the set together in Melbourne while the film crew would continue on with the week. And I didn't have time to build the set, so we went to Wedderburn and used the Wedderburn General Store. And after one day's filming, Ruth and I sat down to have dinner together. Her comments were she had spent one day with me behind a stills camera, had amazing connection. It's all about connection, she said to me, suggested that I should seriously just go and do it, give it a go. And I never looked back, and I'm indebted to her because she just stayed in the back of my mind. Whenever I felt insecure, just do it, just rise above it and just do it. And so I had an enjoyable time directing some really high-end global commercials. And I was able to pick and choose between stills projects. Any stills project that came along that involved portraiture, I was into it regardless of the budget, or destinations and so forth, still life obviously. So I was able to get a balance going for several years, a couple of decades. They're exciting times, exciting days.
Andrew, I'm always amazed if you ever see a photograph of Annie Leibovitz on set. It's like a movie set.
A lot of my stills. I was one of the early Australians to book a film crew from a still. The agencies would, the truck would come because I'd want all the lights and all the same discipline. The only difference is, it's going to be one shot rather than roll the camera. Made for some very, very, very expensive stills. Just before I stopped working, I did about 3 series for this London-based client, and the photographs were about the same price as a movie because we needed full-on crew, pre-production, post-production. I look at Crewdson's work and relate to it, especially when it's onto 8x10. Over on the south wall, there's a number of images from my personal portfolio. Ship workers in dry docks in Jakarta, a riverboat on the Murray, and they're all captured on Kodachrome. My Nikon went everywhere with me, trusted Nikon with me, always loaded. And if I see a moment, the agency would say to the producer, "Where's Rob?" Just disappeared. And she'd know that he's seen something he's gone off to record. And Jakarta, the ship workers, it was a matter of looking down into the dry docks and going, "There's a great shot. I'll be back in a minute." Down I go. 2 hours later, I come back. I recorded that to her. So capturing the moment is equally as important as taking 2 days in the studio to set up a single shot. The ability to just capture it. And it's a lot easier with a Nikon around the neck or the digital camera today to just go and capture it. The one thing that digital does that I don't like is it's instant. In the old days, you would sit back, you'd pull a Polaroid. I was a master at Polaroid, loved me, the biggest user of 8x10 on the globe, I think. They came out and they got me to test their new products in early 80 because I was consumed more than anyone. I had fridges full of it. So you pull a Polaroid, you'd study it and so forth, but everything seems to be click, shoot, we'll fix it on the computer. And so many times in film production, I used to hear, don't worry, we'll fix it in post-production. No, Mr. Fix It in camera, always, whether it be film or whether it be a still. And those disciplines are slowly fading. The disciplines of worrying about design, when they say, we can fix, we can change it today. Worrying about the subtleties, worrying about the technical things in camera seem to have gone, and that's sad. It's very sad. And I think those that grasp the old craftsman-like techniques will have longer lives as photographers in this new generation.